So welcome everyone to another in our expert webinar series. I'm happy to say this webinar marks the third year we've been doing this. So 3 years ago in November is when we started the expert webinar series. So thank you to all of you loyal supporters and attenders and making this something that we would like to continue and provide information to the user community. Today's topic is going to be change management with OpenAir. So this is one of the few webinars where we actually don't go into the OpenAir system, but certainly if you have questions we can do that. And what I'm going to cover in this webinar is really information about when you're dealing with something that needs to change in the OpenAir system, whether it be a fix, an enhancement, maybe a new process, maybe merging a whole other company that's been purchased into the organization. What's the best way or some recommended ways that we've worked with customers on that may help smooth the transition of the activity. But first I want to let everyone know some of the upcoming events for Top Step. So we are coming near the end of the year, so this slide gets skinnier and skinnier until we reschedule for 2014, which I'm happy to say we'll be doing next week. But Monday is the last of the user groups for the year, and it's in Boston. Stephanie Picardi will be our representative up there. So if you're in the area and you're able to attend, definitely would love to see you there. And the last webinar series of the year is in December, and it's our typical year-end webinar that we always like to do as a reminder to folks on things to think about, because when the year finishes, the company holidays don't magically jump into the calendar. So things to just maintenance items to make sure that you remember to do in the system at year end. So let's talk a little bit about change management then. So what is change management? Change management in my thinking is it's really the communication and the coordination of change that's impacting end users. And it could be anything. It could be something small like the rename of a title to something large as in like deploying a whole new system. Okay. I like to categorize the change in 3 different types, and so I'll use these as sort of my gauge of metrics as we go through the conversation. So the first type is your typical fixes. And the fixes are things that come in through a help desk. And then there's a thing called enhancements where you're just trying to make the system more robust, maybe enable some of the features that are coming in the releases that OpenAir comes out with. And then the brand new is you're really attempting something that's not, the system wasn't originally set up for, maybe you are just getting the OpenAir system. So a lot more change management happens in that area. So thinking about these 3 areas, what are some examples so that you can kind of relate to these categories? So change management, to me, fixes are the most common change management because somebody submits something to the help desk or to the OpenAir administrator and said, hey, I can't find this project. Okay, and so you find out maybe it's a data permission, maybe they weren't assigned to the task, maybe the project wasn't set up correctly. It's just a variety of things. And those kind of fixes, there's really minimal change management there unless you have to adjust either a user record or maybe change a whole role definition in order to allow somebody to do their job. When we talk about enhancements though, enhancements are sort of that gray middle area. It could be anything. It could be maybe you're establishing a standards of reports and you want to make sure people understand that these reports are what people should be using on a regular basis, and how do you get that word out? How do you get people trained on it, aware of it? Maybe the releases that come out introduce new features that you would like to take advantage of. How do you get the word out for that? And of course many of you are in the middle of dealing with the conversion to UI3. I actually call that an enhancement, not a brand new thing, because it's really a facelift of the OpenAir system. It does introduce some new features, but overall the functionality of the system itself hasn't really changed. So there's still change management activities involved with even things like the UI that's coming out. And the last, of course, is the brand new items. So these are more of the big ticket items. These are the things that need a lot of change management, a lot of coordination. Maybe you're merging a new region. If you're a global company, maybe your European users are starting to come into the system now. So how do you deal with that? What are the requirements and the data view permissions and all that kind of stuff? Maybe you're rolling out a brand new process, like you never did resource management before. And so you want to put that into what's already established in the system for more forward planning type activities. So these are the things that need more change management because there's more, it's more about the change versus sort of reacting to what needs to change. So I took a step back and looked at, when we deal with change management, what are the things that we have to consider, look at, identify, quantify, so that we can make sure that there's a plan of attack in place for change management. So it always starts off with us with who is impacted. So who's the audience? And it could be people that are only timesheet users. It could be just the system administrator. It could be only IT, but at least someone is impacted by that change. What's the timeline that's associated with the change? Is it something that can happen in the next 5 minutes, or something that requires more planning around sort of a month end or a quarter end type activity? Communication is a big one. I'm very big on communication, making sure that people are very much aware of what's going on, when it's happening, what's happened, and you'll see some tips and tricks regarding that. Then of course the actual implementation of the change and making sure you do some testing. The training of the activity, so if you have an activity that rolls out, even the smallest change requires some type of direction, some type of instructions. And you guys do that pretty much every day just by responding to somebody's question in an email. That's training in a very simple form, obviously. And then support. So once change is in place, how do you make sure that change is handled, supported? Who's going to be answering the questions as that change is introduced into the organization? So of course, these 6 factors vary in effort and scope and size depending on what kind of change you're talking about. So let's just go through each of these and sort of identify what are things to consider as you're talking about these 6 factors. So from an audience identification area, you really want to understand who's involved and who's impacted. Now that could be actually 3 different people, 3 different audiences. The first, of course, is who is impacted by that change. But then you also want to consider who has to approve the change. So just because you have the administrator role in OpenAir doesn't mean you should go start flipping flags, right? So you want to make sure that's coordinated with the people who are aware that the change needs to happen, and if there's any additional approvals. Especially for customers of ours that are on our outsourced administration offering, there are certain things that we go and gain approval for before we will do in the system, because it's something that is above our role of responsibility. And then last is who needs to participate in doing the change. So it could be just the administrator, of course, doing the little checkbox change, but it could be something larger like coordinating with IT to implement a brand new integration in place. So we'll talk about the end user impact in a little bit as we analyze the fix, enhancement, and brand new categories. But I went ahead and sort of said, think about the approves and who's involved from a participation perspective. So if it's just a fix, it's probably just the help desk making that change. If it's an enhancement to the system, maybe management needs to get involved. Hey, I want to take advantage of a brand new booking request. I want to do booking requests in the system, and you have to kind of introduce a process change in order to the organization. So management has to get involved then, because it's impacting more users in the business operations model. And then of course if it's brand new, you have a little bit more oversight even, especially if you're rolling the system out in general. Steering committees are always a great idea, because you're having to make operational model change decisions related to how you're setting up OpenAir. And then who gets involved in all this? Of course the help desk is sort of involved from soup to nuts, but IT a lot of time gets involved, even though IT may not own your OpenAir system. Depending on what the fix is, IT may have to interface with the OpenAir system in some aspects, so they get involved. Of course the end users are always involved, because they're the ones that we have to deal with from an impact perspective. And then occasionally you may have to go to NetSuite support to get some assistance with fixes, for example. Now let's talk about timeline. So what do you have to consider when you're thinking about timeline? So the first off, you have to actually consider when you should do it, when you want to figure out when the change should happen. And then do you have to have any outages for the change to happen? Is there a data migration activity that has to happen where you want people out of the system, and so that you can get in and make the change, make it a clean change, and then let everyone back in the system? Should you consider a weekend cutover? Make it more of a formal release type process where there's an outage maybe on the weekend, similar to software products. And just like OpenAir, this weekend they have a release, and so the system will be unavailable on Saturday morning if you don't know that. And then make sure that when you put your timeline in place to implement the change, consider what the business operations timeline is looking like. So implementing change on November 30th, right in the smack dab of month end, is probably not a good idea if you're looking to introduce new revenue policies. Okay? If you're looking to establish new utilization criteria, may not want to do that in the middle of a quarter. Maybe you want to figure that out to be starting at the start of a quarter. So consider the business as well in your schedule of activities. And of course, define any dependencies internal and external to the organization. Is there something going on in the organization like kickoff that's going to kind of mess up any kind of change awareness in the system, so working around already established items like that. And then we come to communication. So this is the third one, and communication is something that people will only adopt change if they know change is coming and why it's benefiting them, right? So I like to actually put a twist on the old presentation saying. And the old presentation saying that many of you may have heard is, tell them what you'll tell them, then tell them what you told them, right? So this is the whole presentation style is introduce the topic, say the topic, repeat the topic, and that gets people understanding what it is you're trying to communicate. But I put an OpenAir twist on it, and here's what I sort of envision as far as communication effectiveness out to the organization. So tell them what will happen, why it needs to happen, and how it will benefit them. People will adopt change if they see that there's something that is a benefit to them or it's a useful change for them. Advertising that it's a change to make the company better is not necessarily a personal goal, it's a company goal. So think of terms of how would the end user better understand and adopt the change. Then of course make the change, right? Then when the change is made, remind them that the change has been made and why it was made and what the benefit is to them for the change. Okay? But it doesn't stop here, because then you also want to give them the opportunity to give you feedback. So this is actually a lot of customers have this sort of informally with a help desk type thing, but being proactive in gaining feedback or doing surveys of your team that are using the OpenAir system really gives you a lot of good information that you can act on, because certain people only use parts of the system, and if they're using it in a non-effective manner, then they may make somebody else's job who's using it for reporting and stuff much harder. So give them the opportunity to give feedback. And then of course the last one is, and keep reminding them about the change in the system and why it's being adopted, and monitor it, monitor the adoption. So there's much more communication, I think, than just, hey, there's a change coming, the change is in. Okay, so definitely lots of follow-up, because adoption will be better if somebody knows that somebody's looking and watching for it. If you are doing a much larger rollout, like a rollout of OpenAir or a rollout of a new process, or integrating a brand new part of the regions or departments or organizations into the system, you may actually have to communicate with a large audience. And the large audience could not just be end users, but there are also people that are stakeholders in the fact that this project is going on, and at that point it becomes a project. And so if you guys haven't thought about it before, a communication plan is actually a really nice way to sort of put something in place. It's a project management tool, and it gives you the ability to sort of lay out how you're going to make sure people are aware of the change. How are you going to communicate that? Are you having regular meetings? Are you sending things out in the email? Leverage the stuff that's useful to your organization. Do you have a message board? Is there an intranet, a landing site, anything that people see on a regular basis where they go to find general information for the company? That also could be something useful to leverage for your OpenAir. And of course OpenAir itself has the message board on the home module or the dashboard module, and you can use that as well to communicate things effectively, because it's specific to OpenAir then. And then when you remind users of what the system can do and what's been accomplished in the system, think about things that they want to look up themselves. They want to answer questions themselves. FAQs. Find a help desk site and start building your own frequently asked questions. There's some pretty common ones, I bet, like, hey, I can't find my project. Oh, wait, it's page control. There's 11 things on the page, but I can only see 10 of them. Okay, pretty common thing. Or I lost my project. they have it filtered on a field over on the far left, but they had to scroll far right, and they just scroll all that way, and they lost their project because they forgot there was a column filter on. Those are all common questions that I'm sure all of you guys have had to deal with. So put it out in the FAQ. Have people be able to do self-service and find things out themselves. Okay? Or consider weekly tips. So many of you are aware that for a couple of years we were putting out weekly tips regarding OpenAir. We've shifted a bit to talk about tips for consulting, but we'll be starting the OpenAir tips up again in 2014, I'm happy to say. And if you found those useful, think how your end users may find that useful if you adopt that type of approach internally. The moral of the story is, if change happens in your life, how do you adopt and make and benefit from? How do you handle that change? If you get the communication and you can react to the communication, consider applying something like that within your organization. Now the fourth area is the actual implementation. So the implementation here could be anything. The thing about SaaS system, and especially the OpenAir system being so configurable, is the change could literally be checking a box and saving the form. Okay? But it also could be something as complicated as, I'm rolling out a brand new way to do revenue recognition. I'm using incurred versus forecast rules, so all current revenue transactions need to be updated within the database to point to the incurred versus forecast, so later on you get the gist of what I'm rambling about, right? So there's usually could be some complications there. Now, when you make these changes, no matter how big or smaller, is the question you may ask yourself is, do I need to test the change? And my argument is, even if it's checking a box and saving the form, you still should test something. If somebody submits a ticket saying, I can't find this project, you find out, oh, it's because they weren't assigned, you assign them to it. I still go in and proxy as them to make sure they can see the project then. So even that's a kind of reaction or fix is something I still test, and even test is sort of a checkout or a validation. So no matter how small the change is, I definitely recommend testing it to make sure that it's doing what you think it's doing. Okay? And then when is testing recommended? I think all changes should be tested. It's just a matter of how big the change is and how robust the testing needs to be. So here's some examples that I kind of came up with to kind of think about ways that I would test it. So let's say we changed the form. We made a field required conditionally based on the contents of a previous field or something. I still would go in and double check to make sure that that logic works correctly. So I would make that change in the system. I would go test it real quick and say, okay, it's good, and I would roll it out. So it may just be the administrator doing that simple check. What about a brand new feature, for example? What about introducing report folders? Okay? So I implement report folders. As an administrator, I automatically can see them. Great. I proxy in as somebody who is a user or a PM or something, and I find out they actually can't see them because I forgot to give them permission to actually use report folders in the role. So that kind of testing makes sure that you roll things out in a complete fashion. And of course, system integration changes and permission changes, they all have levels of testing in them. Now testing, when you're doing a change in the system, testing may actually be, the change may be large enough that you should consider using a sandbox. Okay? So for those of you who don't know what a sandbox is, it's a test environment for OpenAir. It's actually a completely different URL, and what they do is they take a copy of your production environment and create a sandbox that you can log in and use as much as you want, just like production. The only thing it doesn't do by default is send out emails. So you can sort of do all your resource management testing or project notifications and all that kind of stuff, but you're not going to be able to send any emails out, so you won't confuse people between the environments. That's really if you're doing something that will disrupt operations, right? And something that is you're trying to practice something, practice data migration, practice maybe revenue recognition activities. Things that if you did it in a production environment, you'd have to be very, very careful because it may interrupt the way that you're running the business, doing reports. It may confuse things. Maybe the integrations would pick up data that's test data that would be bad. Okay? There are certain things that you can do in production. You can check out in production if you're doing sort of major release type activities, where you can maybe clone a project and use that project as your test environment and make sure it's excluded from reports and stuff like that. But for the most part, Sandbox is a really good idea. Now, Many customers that use the OpenAir system are software-based companies. Okay? And if you're aware of sort of the traditional software development and testing QA type methodology, there's typically like a 3-tier testing environment. There's the lowest level, like a development environment where developers or coders will write their software, and that's where they do their own testing to make sure it looks good. And then they will promote that into maybe a QA environment, quality assurance environment, where it's subjected to maybe a series of regression tests to make sure it still works correctly with everything else in the organization and people are doing more testing. And if that approves, then it migrates into the production system, does a quick regression test, and it's good to go. So it sort of starts out in a lower level platform and migrates up just because it's a piece of code that can sort of just move into different environments. Okay? The problem is OpenAir doesn't support that type of model. OpenAir actually works in the reverse. In order for you to have a test environment, you copy it from production. So you're going from production backwards into a test environment, and then you can do all your testing in the test environment. The problem is you can't promote changes. You can't just migrate changes from Sandbox into production. You literally recreate what you did in Sandbox. So this is one of the things that it's very difficult to manage change between environments like this. And so putting together a very strict change log process is definitely something. It's hard to keep up to date. You have to make sure you have strict control and people adopt and adhere to this. Or even if you're changing like a role permission or setting a new field with a required format on it, make sure all of your environments that you're using have that same setup. Or if you're doing that in the Sandbox, you have to recreate that in production. So using something like a changelog gives you that ability to kind of go back and figure out why could this be working in Sandbox and not in production, or why is it working in production and not in Sandbox. It's easy to refresh the Sandbox. You cannot refresh production. So change management between environments in OpenAir is difficult without putting a strict process in place. Okay? And then the last two areas are training and support. So change is hard for anyone, and the best way to get to change to be adopted is to make sure people not only are aware of something, but they understand what it is and how to do it, and making sure that they have a clear understanding of what their actions are, what their responsibilities are. So the things that you need to make sure you train people on, it could be very simple instructions. You send out an email saying, okay, so from this point forward, when you clone a timesheet, you will no longer be able to clone the hours because we've made this change. And so that could be, it's a communication, but it's also a training at the same time, giving them instructions as to what the impact is for them. In its most robust form, training is a classroom activity where you have hands-on exercises, and this is really when you're going through deployments, you're doing these types of courses so that people have sort of a real-time interaction with how does my day in the life change because of OpenAir. Then the training itself, the way that you deliver the training is really going to be driven based on what the training is and how complex the change is. So emails are fine, webinars can be done. Long sessions are really better done in person. We all know that. Making sure that there's user guides out there, reference guides. And of course, when you're doing some training, and we like to do training a lot with you guys. We do a lot of training with the OpenAir customers. So some of the tips that we've kind of quelled from over time is make sure that when you do the training, people know where to find the material after the training is done. So make sure you have a current site for training materials, and keep it current, because it can very quickly grow old and then become not useful, and now you're relying on somebody saying something and sending emails and so forth. One trick that I've done with a few customers that I really enjoy is when the system first gets deployed, or when people get onboarded into your organization, what's one of the first trainings they get? Timesheet entry. Okay? What's one of the first alerts they may get? Late timesheet reminders. Okay? Well, what we like to do is we'll record the timesheet training and make it an on-demand webinar. Then you can take that link and put it inside the timesheet alert. So if they happen to get the late timesheet reminder, what does it say? hey, your timesheet is late. If you can't remember how to put your timesheet in, please click here and watch the webinar. So it makes it something that they know exactly where to go. They don't even have to go find it. It's right there, and especially for the new people in the organization, it's very quick reference for them because they're already learning a bunch of stuff, so they can just click on the email. Make sure you consider your audience when you're doing the training, especially if you have a room of software experts. You may not have to go down into the details of explaining databases structure and stuff inside OpenAir. If you're dealing with end user timesheet people that are in the field and their time is very, very important, keep things short and to the point, and make sure that they're aware of the efficiencies like mobile options and stuff at their fingertips. And then last, one thing to consider is you can have resources like us, TopStep, come in and do your training. We love doing your training. But you also have power users in the organization. Those are the people that handle lots of questions and they know the system very well. Consider using them for your training environment because the trainer is the face of change usually, and those are the people that get questions first. And so if you use your power users, you already have established credibility with the trainer. And then of course when it's all over, who's on point to help? So just because you put a change in doesn't mean people will adopt it. You have to monitor it and you have to make sure that you are answering questions right away. Your power users and your administrators are the first place that everyone should be going. So the help desk should definitely pull these people in. If it's a large change like a new deployment, make sure they're staffed at least for a period of time after that go live activity, and consider helping out with the help desk volume of questions and calls. And of course trainers, if you have any outside trainers or trainers that delivered the information, they also will be able to address the questions that come in. From a support perspective, if you are an OpenAir user and you have OpenAir in your environment, yes, OpenAir is a SaaS system. It does not require a lot of IT server footprint type stuff. However, there's a business process, and a critical one at that, being supported by your OpenAir system. So from a support perspective, treat that as if something is like you built the system yourself. So what would you want to establish? A help desk. Make sure that people know who to contact, what the phone number is, where the email is. Make sure that they have a way to feed information back to you. I like this kind of format, this feedback, because it gives you the ability to answer maybe making small changes to the system that will make people want to use the system more. They appreciate that people are listening to them and they're making change because of those feedback items. Maybe have regular open line meetings. Hey, let's do an analysis to see how the new process is. Any questions, comments, concerns about the process. Have a release management methodology. So this is one item that I like this concept. Instead of sort of every day something you log into OpenAir and now this title's changed. Oh, tomorrow I've got a new report. Oh, Thursday I just found out that I can see a new drop-down value in this this field on the project form. When the system keeps changing like that every day, there's not a consistency or a baseline. So consider maybe a release methodology. Think about the stuff that you want to change. Unless it's a critical fix, just kind of bundle it together and then do a release internally. Release your new OpenAir, version 1.7, and have that sort of pull together all of the items that you want to change and advertise to the group. Because then people will see, oh, if there's a change in the system and I don't see it on this release, maybe there was something critical that got fixed and there may be something on the help desk that would explain what happened with it. But a release management methodology gives sort of an anticipation of things will change, but there's an expectation of what's coming. Then you tell them it's coming, and then what happened. And so you just sort of set expectations that maybe the next release people can get new reports, or maybe the next release they can have access to a different timesheet. Release methodology allows you to sort of control when change happens and coordinate that in a more time-oriented fashion. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is just kind of quickly go through the different, taking these 6 factors and the different things to consider in each of those 6 factors. And now let's go back and look at how do those 6 factors get involved with fixes? How do those 6 factors get involved with enhancements? How do those 6 factors get involved with brand new items, like new deployments and stuff? So for fixes, of course, like we said, are kind of like the simple, oh, you couldn't see this because you weren't assigned. Sort of, you're responding to a help desk ticket. So the people who are involved in this or impacted are really the person who submitted the ticket or complained about the issue. And that could be an individual user. It could be an entire group of people based on their role. So all project administrators were not able to do timesheet adjustments because their role wasn't set up to do that. So now they have that ability to do that. Or it could be the entire organization. Maybe something, knock on wood, Active Directory authentication fails. So now nobody in the organization can log into OpenAir. I would hope that would never, ever, ever happen, but that would be a small fix though. It might be something that needs to be fixed by the vendor or maybe IT. That small fix then goes in, it's a reaction to a trouble ticket, fixes and impacts the whole organization. Okay, so fixes can actually impact a wide audience or an individual along the way. From a timeline perspective, they're really quick, or they should be quick. It should be like almost a response time, like a service level agreement time frame. Maybe within the hour of getting the question or a comment, you have to respond back. And you will be doing limited testing because these are small changes usually. How do you communicate? This is usually telling the person that the fix is done, okay? Or communicating to a larger or audience based on using message boards or intranet sites if it's something that's impacting a larger group of people or the whole organization. From a fix perspective, there's probably not a lot of coordination from a fix perspective unless it's something like an integration because these are reactive, right? Something broke or something's not quite right or you can't do or see something that you're supposed to. So it should be a fairly quick fix. And the training aspect at this point is usually just an email out to somebody. From a support perspective though, even fixes have a little bit more effort because if the same question keeps coming in, put it in an FAQ. Think in terms of self-service. If people are having the same problem over and over again, or question or issue, maybe it's something that really is that needs to go in an FAQ. They can just go to like a self-service area and find the information that they need. What about enhancements? So an enhancement, the audience for an enhancement is, I think in terms of like it's a role-based grouping. So if I'm rolling out project management methodology, who's impacted? The project managers, okay? Maybe project administrators. May have a little impact on finance depending on project management ownership for invoices. Maybe a little bit on timesheets. But project management methodology usually is aimed at project managers. Resource management may be aimed at project managers and resource managers. It could be the entire organization. So those of you who have converted or are planning to convert soon to UI3, this impacts everyone because the minute you log in under UI3, everything looks different. But everything still works pretty much the same. Okay. So what's the timeline that you need to do? So timelines for enhancements should be generally quick. Like the UI3, for example, everyone has a 3-month sandbox to play in, but the actual conversion is they flip a switch, the new UI is in place, and the sandbox goes away. Okay? But you have a timeline associated with UI3 because they want you to feel comfortable with it before you go into production. If you have something like a new process that you're implementing, you want to feel comfortable with that. So you may want to have some testing involved. And so that will require the definition of a timeline to allow those activities to happen before you put it into production. When you have for enhancements, the communication could be around your release methodology. Hey, in version 1.8, which will launch in December 15th, the following items will be included in this release, and we will do it over a weekend cutover. So you will basically send messages out, use message boards, make announcements about what is coming. Okay? And then when it actually happens, make announcements about what just happened. Remember that whole make sure people understand the need and the benefit for it. And using a release management methodology gives them an automatic timeline associated with it because then you could schedule releases to happen as you find enough information that needs to be rolled out at the same time. From an implementation perspective, you may have to use a sandbox. Okay? So you may have to use a sandbox to implement things initially, do your testing, so that's of course also going to impact your timeline. the communication involved with that kind of sandbox environment. You may be pulling people in to participate in testing so they'll be aware of change early, but when it gets ready to go to production, that's when you're communicating out to everyone else. Training could be something as simple as an email saying, hey, we have report folders now. Here's how you use them. Here's how you can move things that you currently own report-wise into your own folders, and that would be enough. Maybe it's something that that should have just a short webinar, 5–10 minutes, something that people can watch and be aware of, and be aware of the change and understand the change and how it's working, from a model perspective. Or just sending out slides, a quick reference material. There still has to be training with enhancements typically, so there's at least an email communication, if not a quick reference guide or a short webinar. And from a support perspective, enhancements introduce more change than a fix. So this is proactive change. We're expecting this change to happen. We're scheduling this change to happen. We're training people on this change. So of course people will have questions about the change. And so you want your support desk to either participate as part of the implementation team or the training team and make sure that they're aware of the change so they can handle it. Okay? Also, whenever you have a change, make sure you don't forget to update your training materials that are on that local site that everyone knows to go to. Because the minute you introduce change and don't keep that material up, now people are not quite clear on where to go to get the most recent information. So documentation, I know for a lot of people is a big headache, but it is a very useful headache to get done because then it will give people a comfort factor that they're going to the right place to get the right information. So now the big one, right, the brand new audience. So the brand new things usually impacts the entire organization. Okay? Even if I rolled out something like a project management methodology, that could be an enhancement because you're sort of enhancing the way project managers are. But if you're rolling out a resource management process or a resource management process that never existed before because everyone was using spreadsheets, that impacts managers, the people who own the resources, the people who need the resources understanding what they're, so everyone's getting impacted by something like that, introducing a brand new process. Or it could be even if you're already established on OpenAir and a different department or a different organization is migrating into the OpenAir environment. Although your life may not change dramatically, you may see new values and drop-downs just to support that other organization. So you are still impacted, so you have to make sure you're communicating to not only the people who are established users, but new users as well, because everyone will be impacted by the change. Timelines really vary, but there's usually a lot of coordination involved here. You really can't kind of shove OpenAir in and then say, okay, here's your login, use it, right? So there's a timeline of, with considering everything like the implementation, the testing, the training material development. When is the communication going to happen? What type of approvals do we need from the audience? All of those are going to drive a timeline, so you really do have a project plan that you're putting on here. So make sure that you're thinking of all those things, especially with external coordination like to IT, or if you have any kind of development of integrations that have to happen, all of that has a development life cycle as well that you would put into the timeline. Communication. So as for large projects, you have more time to communicate, but a lot of people will not necessarily take advantage of that time. So communication is something that early and often, communicate early and often and let people know what's coming, when are they supposed to be taking action on things. Then of course after it's done, what is their responsibility, what are they supposed to be doing, are they aware that the change happened, right? So what's coming, it's here, it's done, keep communicating, right? Take advantage of longer time frames early and often, okay? Definitely need a sandbox in this environment. We have worked, Top Step ourselves have worked with some customers where we're migrating a new organization into an existing production environment without a sandbox. That is possible. There are ways to do that. You definitely have to know the system very, very well, roles and permissions and filter sets and all that great stuff to be able to do that. But I would typically recommend a sandbox. I do know it's an additional cost for many of you, but Sandbox gives you that freedom of you can make a mistake and not suddenly bring down, screw up a quarter-end report because you migrated data incorrectly. Okay. So definitely recommend a Sandbox, but of course when you have a Sandbox that's 2 different environments, so change log, really strict change log to make sure you understand what you're changing in the Sandbox and what you want to repeat and recreate in production. For training, you usually have to do the whole training kit and caboodle. Let's make sure that there's training materials, there's slide decks, quick reference guides, maybe even user guides, more robust things, report catalogs that explain what the reports are that are coming out. Understand how you're going to deliver that training. It could be classroom, it could be webinars, it could be a series of webinars. And make sure that all of that information is put into the training site that people know they have to go to find the most recent training materials. Okay. And then support, of course, because you're making a big change in the organization, brand new change to the organization. So support is really something that it's not really like the help desk is not sort of brought along. The people who are implementing the change should be your help desk. So they will know the most of the ins and outs and the gotchas and the frequently asked questions that happened even during testing. They will be a good face of support for you. And see what you can do from a self-service perspective. When many of you deployed OpenAir, you probably had lots and lots and lots of questions. They were all the same question. I'm locked out. Can you unlock me? I can't remember my password. I can't find my project. How do I get to a timesheet? Those are all FAQs that, looking back now, if you had an FAQ site, perhaps people would have been able to look that information up and be more efficient on being able to get things resolved for themselves, for example. And then from a help desk perspective, just like anything, and to avoid frustration, if people ask a question, they want a response right away, especially if it's email. Right? So try to make sure that your help desk knows to prioritize and be very responsive. You run into this in your daily life. If you call a help desk, you don't want to be put on the customer support help desk phone on hold for 45 minutes. You want to answer right then because you're calling right then. So in summary, the communication actually is one of the things that enables change management success. And communicate early and often is my motto, because people will adopt change if they know change is coming, if they know what the change is and they know how the change impacts them and benefits them in the long run. Make sure you have really clear direction on where to go for help, where to find information on it. And then make sure that you consider your audience. Not everyone can sit down and be in an 8-hour training course. So how can you break that up and deliver that more effectively? Not everyone wants to try to schedule in a live webinar. Can you do on-demand type stuff? Is an email sufficient? And then finally, make sure that if you are implementing things or in a Sandbox environment, change control, change control, change control. It's very critical. It's very easy to miss something, a checkbox, a form permission as you move between systems, because you really have to recreate in production from the Sandbox environment. We'll wrap it up with a simple summary of let us know if you would like any more information on how to handle the change within your organization, within your OpenAir system. And of course, definitely let us know what your experience has been. That's always very helpful feedback. The OpenAir user group is there for you guys. It's there for all of us to communicate and share experiences. So join that LinkedIn group if you're not part of it, or come visit our website and listen back to this webinar at any time. And we definitely appreciate you attending these webinars and the support that you've given us as an organization. So thank you and have a good rest of your day, everyone.